Alright, YouTube, Occult Literature 55, Pow-Wows, also called Long Lost Friend. I've subtitled my edition An American Grimoire, because that's exactly what it is. It comes from the 1820s, Pennsylvania Dutch tradition. Very good work with a little bit of influence that I think people have overlooked. This is, of course, by John George Hohman. Now, first, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition off of Amazon. Cheapest edition there. Oh, imagine that. Oh, that always happens. Okay, no surprise. Second, link to my books blog, where you can purchase many other materials regarding folk magic, which this work is kind of a grimoire and kind of a folk magic work. I'm going to class it with the grimoires because of its format. Alchemical works, spiritual things, apocryphal gospels, anything under the sun, ever-growing library. I also obtained the Greater Key of Solomon, an actual out-of-copyright version of the Greater Key of Solomon, so I can't wait to edit my way through that. Hohman's Pow-Wows has nothing to do, first and foremost, this is important to mention, it has nothing to do with Mesoamerican magic. When we think of the term powwow, it would be shelved in our minds with words like totem, or something like that. As we think about it as like, oh, Native Americans or maybe Boy Scouts having like a powwow around the fire. It has literally nothing to do with that. It is a typical early 1800s sort of combination of herbal medicine, a prayer book, which is basically invocations just involving simple prayers to Jesus, especially, and the Godhead or various angelic forces. And it's part gray magic, you could call it as well. For instance, it contains invocations and sort of brief rituals, not just for healing disease, but also stopping thieves, as in literally gluing them to the spot and causing them to suddenly, magically be unable to move. Now, I have identified in this work multiple similarities between this Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, circa the 1820s, and the Petit Albert, which is an 18th century grimoire from France. I believe that what I'm seeing here isn't really that Hohman or anybody else at the time was reading the Little Albert. I mean, people back then, within that community, they would have spoken, of course, German, and then they would have spoken English. It's an American sort of setup. It's Americana. It's Appalachian lore, so to speak. But I think there might be some older tradition here that's influencing both works. First, the French cycle with the Little Albert, which has been labeled a bric-a-brac, as in a compilation of different traditions across Europe. Anyway, that is that not all of it is strictly from France itself, originated in France by a French mage or something like that, and also influenced this tradition among the Pennsylvania Dutch. That's what I believe that I'm seeing here, because the fixation on certain types of ritualisms, charms, and the effects thereof are uncannily similar, especially the passages regarding protection against animals, against rabid dogs, and things like that. I mean, it's very, very similar. Even the prescriptions for fighting these things off carry similarities. So there's definitely some sort of crossover. You got two entirely different continents, supposedly two linguistic traditions, and yet you've got half a dozen major similarities between the works. There's a reason for this. This didn't happen by coincidence, so something is influencing them both. Whether or not it's somebody familiar with the Petit Albert took some of that material and threw it in, or whether it's an older tradition influencing both, is not entirely clear. I'm going to say the latter is probably a little bit more likely, given the fact that this community probably didn't speak French. And at the time, there was no English edition. So, be that as it may. But the work is about 75% white magic, that is, especially healing of hysterical women, which is funny, the mother fits, I guess postpartum depression, healing horses, protecting cattle, preventing thieves. There are also sort of ways, rites, ceremonies, charms, potions, amulets, talismans, whatever, to prevent you from being injured by sword or by axe or by gun. It has a charm against ball and powder, which, of course, we're talking about a musket or a cannon or something like that. It's very interesting. Now, I briefly debated whether to keep the original inclusions by the editors of the work intact or whether to slim it down just to Hohman's original work, because they threw in things that weren't part of the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition. In fact, it explicitly lists sources like, I think it was the New York Post or something like that. It's talking about what we would consider slightly mundane things, like how to create dyes for cloth through various herbal and chemical recipes and things like that, curing like bots and horses and so forth. I decided to leave it intact because it is original to the first edition. It's not like they threw it in 100 years later and expanded it and said, oh, well, this is the new revised edition, and then they just slapped like 10 pages of extra content in. I did decide to remove the running index at the end because it really served no general purpose beyond simply, I mean, I don't know why they didn't put it on the first part of the book anyway. But it's about 100 pages long, so it's similar to the Little Albert in length anyway, which is just another similarity. Even the format of the two texts, ultimately, other than the language they're found in, is somewhat similar. It's uncanny, honestly, and it's got similar content. That is, most of it's not really diabolical, most of it really has to do with protection and healing, but I think that what you see with Hohman's Pow-Wows is one of the earliest American grimoires. That is mostly grimoires themselves. I mean, even though this is part folk tradition as well, they come from Europe. They come from especially the French tradition, and philosophically speaking, from the Latin or English traditions. As far as the sort of devils and witches stuff, the real diabolical stuff, a lot of it's German. You look at I can't remember the name of the book. Never mind. The Black Raven of Faust, of course. That was the one I was thinking of. Usually they're European. You'd think of the Book of Saint Cyprian or something like that. They don't come from the Americas. They gravitate into the Americas, and most of the American lore is like, antebellum through Victorian period quack journals. That is, it has to do with medicine or growing crops or something. And or later on, when the United States comes into its heyday within the occult, you're really looking at stuff like mesmerism, hypnotism, some of the 1910s through the Depression and into World War II stuff, a lot of prophetic material from the evangelical movement. War's End by Wing Anderson is a very good work, and that's really where it comes from. Experimentations with technology in the occult, using radio and stuff. The UFO sort of stuff originates there, primarily speaking, as well. You have tales of airships going back to the mid-1800s, almost back to the Civil War era. So Hohman's Pow-Wows, because of its date and its manufacture, while it takes European traditions, certainly, may be seen as perhaps the earliest American grimoire, at least one of the very early ones. The country hadn't even existed for that long. It was barely 50 years old at the time that this was in circulation. So you think people that were alive during the Revolution were still alive in some cases to actually read this book. It's very good, it's very well written, it's also extremely dense, like the Little Albert and like some of these other grimoires. Some of them are very undense. They're very, very open and airy, and there's a lot of empty space and a lot of illustrations thrown in for no reason. This doesn't do that. It compressed them down into as small a format as possible. So you have over 100 individual sections in those 100 pages. It's very, very in-depth and covers a wide range of materials, some of which no longer matter. A cure for colic or something like that. But some of them still could potentially be used as folk traditions today. And it does. It comes from the Pennsylvania region. It is purely American, even while based partially on at least one European tradition of lore. So again, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition of this work off Amazon. Second link to the Tarl Warwick Books blog. That's about all. Peace out.